everyone, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to install a set of our Blitz Rock Sliders on our 4th Gen Tacoma. So we're going to dive right into it here on the passenger side of the truck. First things first, if your truck and your options package came with a factory step of any kind, that's going to need to be removed. Our truck did not, so we don't have one to show you, but typically those are going to be held in with 6 to 8 factory fasteners, usually M8, so you'll need either a 12 or 13 millimeter socket to get that hardware removed. Once you have those out of the way and you have a bare frame to work with here, you're going to grab your front mounting leg. It's going to line up with factory threaded holes here along the side and kind of position based off of this front body mount. You can then start with an M8 bolt going into here. That's going to be a flanged hex head from your bolt pack, and then on the back side you've got 2 more slightly larger flanged hex heads to go in the 2 vertically slotted holes here. To access and install the hardware for the front mounting slot here, you are going to have to remove this plastic cap from the front body mount. It's just got 2 tabs back in here. Usually you can just push these in with your finger. You may need a screwdriver and then pull down to release that. With that out of the way, you have a 5/16 bolt with a washer that is going to go into the front slotted hole here. So pressing this up, it should line up relatively easily to that factory hole here in the body mount, very similar to the one you can see out here. And then on the inside, you'll install a serrated flange nut. With all of that hardware started, you're going to kind of push this mount into its final position so that we can tighten up our hardware using a 14 mil socket, a 13 mil socket, and a 1/2 inch socket here. So we're going to press this all the way up, tight to the frame. Then we can tighten this up. Now for this next hole, we're going to have to break out our drill. A couple things I want to mention here. Back to this 5/16 bolt, you may have to clearance that with a 5/16 drill bit as well. Those factory slots vary in size just a little bit and may be a little bit tight there. For this one, we provide a 1/2 inch thread cutting bolt, so you're going to have to essentially drill a pilot hole for that bolt here. We're going to start by center punching and using a small 1/8 inch bit for our pilot. I'm actually going to try and get that out kind of toward this leading edge just a little bit. That'll just make sure we get the best flange engagement on our bolt out here. Now before we do drill this hole is considered to be somewhat optional, just like one we're going to point out on the rear mount. What we mean by that is if you're purchasing these to solely act as a step to get you in and out of your vehicle and onto your roof with no intention of really using them as a true rock slider, you could leave these out. Everything else is going to hold it safely on the truck and you're not going to have any major concerns along the way there. We're always going to recommend taking the time to install these, however, as they're going to make this the most strong and complete product available. So with all that being said, I'll drill out our pilot hole here. Again, starting with that 1/8 inch bit, we're going to work our way up with a series of a few drill bits to a 7/16 hole. Once you're drilled out to 7/16, you'll need a 3/4 socket and an impact ideally. This is the thread cutting bolt. They're easily identifiable in your bolt pack because one, they're typically the largest hardware in there, as well as they're going to have a tapered edge with multiple cutting edges kind of built in there. So we'll press that into the hole and run it in tight with our impact. So moving to the rear leg, you first have 2 nut tabs you're going to need to install on the inside of the frame. So the first of which is going to go in the rectangle hole up here, just behind this factory ground strap where it bolts to the frame. There is going to be a hole plug in there that has to be removed with a pry tool or a screwdriver. And you can then feed this with the nuts kind of out toward the rear. In here, you can slide that back and then you'll rotate it so that it sits down along this bottom edge. And there's 2 holes down here that you have to line it up with, which we'll kind of show in a moment. The second nut tab is this one here with just a single welded nut. it's going to go through this round hole, which again will have a hole plug. You'll then slide that in and forward as you rotate it. And again, it's going to line up with a factory hole down here on the bottom. We'll then grab our rear mounting leg, which is going to be your bracket that's got 2 legs extending from the frame. The cutout that you can hopefully see here is up toward the top and toward the rear of the vehicle. And then we're going to be threading 6 of our flanged M10 bolts through the side mounting holes and into factory threaded frame holes. So we'll lift this up into position here with 1 bolt kind of at the ready and line it up. As I get that started, that should support the weight of it while we get our remaining hardware in place. With all of our side mounting hardware in, I'm going to grab my 14 mil and run these most of the way in to kind of control some of this up and down movement in our bracket. However, we still want to leave this one a little bit loose until we get the slider bolted to our outer mounting flanges so that we have this up and down adjustment still available. For the lower mounting hardware, you're going to use 3/8 hex bolts with washers. Those are going to go in the 3 slotted holes here, leaving the 1 round hole at the very rear of your bracket to be drilled, where you can then install that remaining self-tapper. With one hand, I'm able to manipulate the nut tab from the outside and line it up with the hole here so that we can then start all of these 3/8 bolts by hand. At this point, we're going to do a little bit of assembly and kind of prep work before getting the slider installed to those mounts. So you want to find the lower skid as well as the main slider assembly. You can drop the slider down into the skid, and at that point you're going to be looking for the 5/16 black button head hardware you have, along with washers and serrated flange nuts, which are going to go through the 4 holes along both the outside flange here as well as the inside flange back on my side to get this bolted together. Once you have all of those started, you'll need a 3/16 hex to tighten them up. Next, we'll install our rock lights into each end of the slider. The ones you're going to receive are going to look identical to what I have here. However, the ones you're going to see us install already have a waterproof electrical connector installed, which you'll receive if you purchase our universal rock light wire harness kit, and it will be installed with heat shrink connectors like you see here. With these lights, you're going to receive white nylon spacers that need to be installed into each recessed hole location here, and then the light will be fed into the rock slider and installed on the back side of this face using the provided black number 8 screws. To tighten these up, you'll need a 3/32 hex and 11/32 wrench to hold the nut here on the inside. Lastly, before this gets installed, we're going to put our clip nuts in place. So you'll have 5 along the back edge here that are going to be the smaller M6 clip nuts, and then 6 for the bottom that are going to be slightly larger 5/16. If you haven't used these before, they essentially just push on from the edge, and you should hear an audible click as they snap into position. So here's a closer look at the 2. At this point, the slider assembly is ready to bolt to the legs, so I did put a couple rags down on top of our hoist arms to protect the finish there. So keep that in mind, do the same depending on how you're lifting this into position. And then we'll grab a couple of the remaining 1/2" hex bolts with washers and nuts and slide this in place over here. You'll secure these in place using those same 1/2" hex bolts at all of the mounting locations here. The bolt will run out like this from the inside out on your mount, and then we'll hang the slider on it and install the nuts down on the inside of the slider. So with one of those in there, I'm going to lift this up, lining it up with the bottom slot inside of here, and then we can reach in and install that nut.
If you're doing it this way, just keep in mind checking the clearance between the painted body and the slider here, and then I'll go to the other end and lift it up into position, doing the same thing, and that'll just make it easier to line up and install our remaining hardware. Once you have most of this hardware installed, keep in mind that you will want to take a step back and, using these slotted mounts on your slider here, make any adjustments front to rear that you may need to kind of line that up to your visual preference really, but also just making sure that it looks nice and even on the truck and making sure you have plenty of clearance between each end and the vehicle body. Once you're happy with the positioning front to rear, you'll need a 3/4 wrench to reach in from behind and tighten the bolt into the serrated flange nut. You can likely use a power tool on the lower hardware, but it gets pretty tight up on top and you're likely going to have to switch to, like I said, a ratcheting wrench. Once you have that hardware tight, you'll now want to take a step back and also take a look at the slider to make sure it's nice and parallel to the truck. You can make any minor adjustments to that with that rear mount that you should still have loose at this time, and then go ahead and tighten up that rear mounting hardware to the frame. After you've done that, you'll grab your step tray, which can then be slid into the slider here. You'll start on one end, you'll have to kind of drop it down in, and then slide it back down to line it up with your clip nut holes on both the bottom and the back. You can then slide the logo tread plate over the top here and line up the mounting holes as well. For any minor adjustment you may need to make to your clip nuts, it's helpful just to have a small pick or a flat screwdriver. That should help you line up the clip nuts down there since they are slotted for compliance. And then you'll be installing 5/16 button heads with washers into the lower holes down here, and the smaller black M6 bolts with washers as well along the back. You can then tighten your back hardware with a 4mm hex and the lower hardware with a 3/16 hex. At this point, the only thing left to do on the mounting would be that final thread cutting bolt in the rear mount if you haven't done so already. Then you can repeat this install over on the other side. From there, you're going to want to wire in these rock lights, which how you do that is entirely up to you. This truck, we already installed our universal rock light wiring harness on, so it's as easy at this point as plugging these in. And for you 4th Gen owners, if you haven't checked out that video already, go ahead and do so since we filmed that video on this specific truck, so you can get a step-by-step on how to get yours wired up. At that point, this installation is complete. So as always, if you guys have any questions at all about this install or anything we offer here at Victory 4x4, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.